Just after 10 a.m. on a cold October morning in 1974, a police constable patrolling the quiet English town of Ossett, West Yorkshire, stumbled upon a scene he'd never forget. A man was wandering aimlessly down the middle of the street. He was completely naked, his body drenched in what looked like red paint. But as the officer got closer, he realized it wasn't paint. It was blood. The man was screaming, his voice raw with a chilling, unearthly terror, yelling just one phrase, over and over. "It is the blood of Satan." That man was Michael Taylor, a 31-year-old butcher and father of 5. The blood, police would soon discover, belonged to his wife, Christine. Only hours earlier, Michael had been the subject of a grueling, all-night exorcism. After a torturous 8-hour battle, a team of priests claimed to have cast out 40 separate demons from his soul. But when they sent him home, exhausted and broken, they gave a terrifying warning. They hadn't been successful. 3 demons remained inside him: insanity, violence, and murder. What police found back at the Taylors' small family home was a scene of such unimaginable horror, it defied all reason. It was an act of violence so brutal, it forced the entire nation to question the very nature of evil itself. Was this simply a case of a man spiraling into a violent psychosis? Or, as Michael Taylor and his exorcists claimed, did the devil really make him do it? Before the darkness descended, Ossett was the last place on earth you'd expect a story like this to happen. In the early 1970s, it was a traditional English market town, a place of cobbled streets, local pubs, and a tight-knit community where everyone knew your business. It was a town built on industry and faith, with church spires reaching up to an often gray Yorkshire sky. And at the heart of this ordinary town lived an ordinary family, the Taylors. Michael, 31, was a manual laborer who often worked as a butcher, a detail that would later seem grimly significant. He was married to Christine, his 29-year-old wife, and together they had a bustling home filled with the noise and laughter of their 5 young sons. By all accounts, their marriage was a happy one. Michael's own father would later recall how the two of them, even after years of marriage and 5 kids, were still like a young couple in love. He said, they were still courting throughout their marriage. Michael affectionately called Christine his darling wife. Neighbors described Michael as a mild-mannered, kind, and loving father. But beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic life, a quiet struggle was brewing. A few years earlier, Michael had suffered a severe back injury that left him with chronic pain, making it hard to keep a steady job. The financial strain and constant pain started to wear him down. He became prone to deep bouts of depression, withdrawing from his family and friends into a silence that worried everyone who loved him. The Taylors weren't a particularly religious couple. Like many in Ossett, they were culturally Christian but rarely went to church. They were just a young family trying to build a life, navigating the everyday challenges of work, money, and raising kids. They had no idea that Michael's search for peace would lead them not toward a remedy, but toward a spiritual doorway into a nightmare. In 1974, a new kind of faith was sweeping through England. The charismatic renewal movement, with its passionate worship, speaking in tongues, and belief in faith healing, offered a powerful connection to God that felt worlds away from the quiet hymns of the old Anglican Church. In Ossett, this movement found a home in the Christian Fellowship group. It was a friend, worried about Michael's depression, who suggested he attend a meeting. Maybe, the friend thought, this was what he needed. The group was led by Marie Robinson, a 21-year-old lay preacher who was both young and intensely charismatic. Her soft-spoken, old-time religion instantly appealed to Michael. He threw himself into the group, attending every meeting. In this room full of fervent believers, he finally felt like he belonged. The Christian Fellowship group wasn't a place for quiet prayer. Their meetings were intense, emotional events. Members would be overcome by the Holy Spirit, speaking in what they believed were divine languages. They practiced faith healing and, most importantly, they performed exorcisms. They believed that sickness and psychological distress weren't just matters of the mind or body, but were often the work of demonic forces that had to be cast out. For a man like Michael, who felt a darkness growing inside him that he couldn't explain, this idea wasn't frightening, it was a revelation. It gave a name to his suffering. It wasn't just depression, it was a demon. Christine joined the group with him, but it was Michael who became truly obsessed. He fell deeper under Marie Robinson's spiritual guidance. Soon, she began offering him private meetings. In these sessions, they would reportedly sit across from each other for hours on end, sometimes for up to 8 hours at a time, just making the sign of the cross over and over. They believed this bizarre ritual would nullify the evil power of the full moon, which they thought was affecting Michael. It was becoming clear to others that Michael's devotion to Marie was becoming something more than spiritual. Michael's life started to revolve entirely around Marie Robinson and the fellowship group. The time he spent at home with Christine and their kids dwindled, replaced by long hours in prayer meetings and those strange, private sessions. When he wasn't with Marie, he became withdrawn and sullen, sinking into a depression that was now deeper and more volatile. Christine watched as the husband she loved was slowly replaced by a stranger. She began to suspect his intense connection with the young preacher wasn't purely religious. The breaking point came during a group meeting. In front of everyone, Christine confronted the issue head-on. She stood up and announced that she believed her husband's relationship with Marie Robinson was, in her words, carnal. She was accusing them of having an affair under the guise of spiritual mentorship. The accusation was a bombshell, and what happened next was the first real glimpse of the violence to come. Michael Taylor erupted, but his anger wasn't aimed at his wife. It was aimed at Marie. He flew into a rage, screaming obscenities at her, his mild-mannered personality completely gone, replaced by a terrifying, guttural fury. Witnesses said he physically attacked her. As Marie screamed back, Michael himself began shouting that he could feel evil inside him, that a dark presence was taking over. The chaos eventually died down. At the next meeting, Michael, seemingly back to his old self, apologized to Marie, claiming he had no memory of the attack. Marie and the group forgave him, but the incident had set off alarm bells. The mask had slipped. For the group, this was all the confirmation they needed. The darkness inside Michael Taylor wasn't just a metaphor. It was real. It was a demonic infestation, and it had just shown its face. This was the moment everything spiraled out of control. A private struggle had just exploded into a public spectacle of violence and alleged possession. If you're finding this story as fascinating as it is terrifying, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the church decides to fight back. After his public outburst, Michael's mental state fell apart with terrifying speed. The man who was once a loving husband and father became unpredictable and frightening. He turned his rage against anything holy, destroying every Bible in his house. He would kneel in the middle of the street, shouting at the sky. He told terrified neighbors that he had seen the devil walking through Ossett. He developed a paralyzing fear of the moon, the very thing Marie Robinson had tried to cure. The quiet man was gone, replaced by someone paranoid and filled with a rage that was increasingly directed at his wife and children. He was a man coming completely undone. To any of us today, these look like the tragic signs of a severe psychotic break, a man in desperate need of psychiatric help. But for the Christian Fellowship Group, the diagnosis was far more ancient. They saw Michael's behavior not as a red flag for mental illness, but as definitive proof of demonic possession. They believed he was no longer in control. An ordinary doctor was out of the question. They needed a spiritual specialist. The group arranged a meeting with a local Anglican priest, Father Peter Vincent, from St. Thomas's Church in Barnsley. Father Vincent was known in charismatic circles for his experience in deliverance, the modern term for exorcism. After meeting with the unstable Michael, Father Vincent confirmed the group's fears. He agreed that an exorcism was not only necessary but urgent. He called in another clergyman for help, a Methodist minister named Reverend Raymond Smith. Together, they would confront the evil they believed had taken root in Michael Taylor's soul. A date was set. At midnight, on October 5, 1974, at St. Thomas's Church, they would perform the sacred rite. They were preparing for a battle against the devil himself, having no idea they were about to light the fuse on a human time bomb. The exorcism began as Saturday night bled into Sunday morning. Inside St. Thomas's Church, The air was thick with fear and holy conviction. Father Vincent and Reverend Smith led the ritual, with members of the Christian Fellowship group, including a distraught Christine Taylor, watching on. What happened over the next 8 hours wasn't a quiet prayer. It was a violent, brutal ordeal. Almost as soon as the ritual began, Michael reportedly fell into uncontrollable convulsions. He thrashed on the church floor with such force that several people had to physically restrain him, eventually tying him down to stop him from hurting himself or others. According to those present, he displayed all the cinematic signs of possession. He spat, growled like an animal, foamed at the mouth, and tried to bite and scratch anyone who came near. The exorcists didn't back down. They screamed prayers and commands at him, or rather, at the things they believed were inside him. They doused him repeatedly with buckets of holy water. At one point, they took the wooden crucifix from Michael's neck, declared it tainted, and set it on fire. In what was later described in court as an indignity that defies comprehension, they shoved other crucifixes into his mouth, trying to physically force the evil out. Throughout the night, they forced him to confess his sins, even sins he hadn't committed, all to name and shame the demons into revealing themselves. And in their minds, it was working. One by one, they would name a demon and, after a struggle, declare it cast out. Over 8 grueling hours, they claimed to have expelled over 40 distinct demons. They named them as they went: incest, bestiality, blasphemy, lewdness, and dozens more. As dawn approached, everyone was exhausted. The ministers were drained. The church members were traumatized. And Michael Taylor lay on the floor, battered, soaked, and spiritually destroyed. The priests felt they had made progress, but the battle wasn't won. They came to a terrifying conclusion. They believed at least 3 powerful demons were still inside him. They named them insanity, violence, and the single most dangerous demon of all, murder. But they couldn't do any more. They were too exhausted to continue. In a fateful decision, they untied Michael Taylor and released him to his wife, Christine. They sent him home to rest, warning her that the fight wasn't over. The killer was still inside. At around 8 a.m. on Sunday, October 6th, a physically and emotionally shattered Christine Taylor helped her husband walk out of the church and took him home. We'll never know what was said in the car or in the house. The 5 Taylor children, thankfully, had spent the night at their grandparents' and were spared from what came next. Just 2 hours later, police got the first call. A man was in the street, naked, covered in blood, screaming about Satan. When police found Michael Taylor, his hands were raw and bleeding, not from a weapon, but from the act of violence itself. An officer went to the Taylor's house to investigate. What he saw was so horrific that when a fellow officer arrived, he warned him, "You don't want to see this one. It's the wife. It's a right mess in there. There's not much of her left." Inside the once happy family home was absolute carnage. Michael had attacked Christine with a frenzied, inhuman brutality. There was no murder weapon. He had used his bare hands, the hands of a butcher, to strangle her, gouge out her eyes, and rip her tongue from her mouth. He had torn the flesh from her face until she was unrecognizable. After killing his wife, he had turned his rage on the family's poodle, strangling and dismembering it with the same savage force. When Michael was arrested, his statements were just as chilling as his crime. He showed no remorse, only a strange sense of release. When asked how he felt, he replied, "Released. I am released. It is done. The evil in her has been destroyed." He seemed to believe that Christine had been possessed and that he was compelled to kill her. He told investigators about the exorcism, explaining its failure with a terrifying clarity. He said, "They were too late. I was compelled by a force within me to destroy everything living within the house." The trial of Michael Taylor began in March 1975, and it was an immediate media sensation. The story was a shocking mix of faith, sex, and extreme violence. The central question hung over the entire proceeding. Was this man a cold-blooded killer or a pawn in a supernatural game? The jury was warned about the gruesome evidence they were about to see. Michael's defense team didn't argue that he was innocent. They argued he was insane. His lawyer, Harry Ognall, painted a damning picture of the Christian Fellowship group. He argued they were a fanatical, cult-like group that preyed on a vulnerable man. He famously described the situation as neurotics, feeding neurosis to a neurotic. The defense argued that Michael Taylor was already suffering from a mental illness, likely psychosis. This illness was then dangerously amplified by the group's intense indoctrination, his obsessive relationship with Marie Robinson, and finally, the exorcism itself. A psychologist testified that the grueling, 8-hour ritual was a profoundly traumatic event that would have been enough to trigger a complete psychotic break in an already fragile mind. The prosecution, faced with the sheer irrationality of the crime, ultimately agreed with the defense. Michael himself testified. He claimed, as he had from the start, that he had no memory of the murder. He insisted he had deeply loved his wife and could only explain his actions by saying he was under the control of evil forces. In his broken mind, he had come to believe that Christine herself was possessed and that killing her was some kind of twisted purification. In the end, the jury delivered its verdict. Michael Taylor was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The law had its answer. It was madness. But for many, that legal definition felt incomplete. The exorcist had warned that the demon of murder was left inside him, and hours later, he murdered. Was it a tragically self-fulfilling prophecy, where the suggestion of violence planted in his mind became a command he was forced to obey? Or did Father Vincent and Reverend Smith see something truly evil in that church, an intelligence they identified but failed to conquer? Following the verdict, Michael Taylor was sent to Broadmoor, England's most famous high-security psychiatric hospital. He spent 2 years there and another 2 in a secure ward before being released in 1978, deemed cured. But the tragedy wasn't over. After his release, he reportedly tried to commit suicide 4 times, a man forever haunted by what he had done. And what about the exorcists? Reverend Raymond Smith expressed some regret, admitting the exorcism had failed. But Father Peter Vincent remained defiant. He never showed any public remorse for his role in the events that led to Christine's death. He insisted Michael had been genuinely possessed, that they had only tried to help, and that the tragedy was the work of the devil, not man. His career in the church continued. The Ossett exorcism murder sent shockwaves through the UK. It sparked a furious national debate about exorcism and the responsibilities of religious leaders when dealing with the mentally ill. It served as a horrifying, real-world lesson on the deadly intersection of religious fanaticism and psychological collapse. The story of Michael Taylor leaves us on a razor's edge, caught between 2 terrifying possibilities. One is the story of a sick man, failed by a community that saw demons instead of disease, who was ultimately pushed into violence by the very people who claimed to be saving him. The other is a story that is in some ways even more frightening. The story of a man who truly was invaded by an outside, malevolent force, a force that priests battled, but ultimately lost to, with his wife paying the ultimate price. The line between fervent faith and dangerous delusion is terrifyingly thin. Was the killer inside Michael Taylor a demon named murder, or a sickness in his own mind? We may never know for sure. What do you think really happened in that house in Ossett? Was this a case of profound mental illness, or was a genuine supernatural evil at play? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you want to dive into more cases that blur the line between the explained and the unexplainable, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.